But I think the entire episode raises very serious questions about how the administration handled the threat and the risks it was willing to take with other Americans.
So, Congressman, to that point, what would you want to learn in a congressional inquiry?
Well, look, protecting the president obviously is paramount in these kinds of situations. We also want to make sure when we use a ruse such as this one that passengers are still safe on other aircraft as well. And I trust the military to do so, as well as Secret Service. I think that if the threat were dangerous enough for the president to be secretly moved to another aircraft, which was a wise decision, we still want to make sure that members of the press are protected as well. But at the very same time, we don't want to cause the kinds of concerns that would have reports leak that would alert our enemies or our adversaries during this kind of exchange, to make sure that the principal is protected, but also that the Fourth Estate and staffers are protected as well.
Carolina, when you are talking to folks, Secret Service, current, former, how usual or unusual do they say this were? Was protocol followed here?
I like the way you're asking the question, Alicia, but let me flip it a little bit and just say, when I first started to learn about this jaw-dropping reporting by my old news organization, the Washington Post, I was impressed by this, absolutely impressed by what they figured out. Kudos to them. And initially, I had concerns and questions about whether or not this threat was legit and how much certainty, essentially, or how much probability the Secret Service placed in this threat. But in the last several hours, as I've talked to more sources inside the government and also those who are conferring directly with the Secret Service, I'm learning that the probability of this threat was fairly high. And indeed, the Secret Service was willing to add a new risk, moving the president from the safest plane on the planet to a different one to avoid him being potentially targeted. However, I want to emphasize something that I think is important to share that is news to me, which is that these sources tell me the Secret Service concluded that everybody on what we are jokingly calling Old Air Force One was exceptionally safe. The cabinet members that were aboard, the press that were aboard, the fact that they weren't read into this, I have some questions about as well.
How can it be both at the same time? If the president's life was in danger, that meant that those people's lives was in danger too. Especially by leaving them on that aircraft without anybody knowing what was going on. And when it comes to the feds, they basically think that they're high almighty because they've got a little bit of education and they're up in rank. Kind of like the guy that I worked for 10 years down in Jackson, Tennessee, Steve Hardy, his brother, worked for the Internal Revenue Service, and he refused to get any of his mail at his own house because he was afraid that somebody could possibly put a bomb in his mailbox. But yet now, he would allow for the mail to come to collision specialist mailbox, and at any given time, either the secretary or one of the guys or somebody like that went out and checked the mail every morning. So once more, passing, still wanting to make the big bucks, at the time, probably making $100,000 a year, and this was like in the late 90s, but not willing to take the risk. It just goes to show you how lame and how tacky that these people treat people below them. And I'm not saying that they're all like that, but I do know that me having exchanges with various federal agencies, we're looked upon as basically just being scum for the most part. Not all of them, but for the most part.
Whenever you have tens of people read into a situation, you increase the risk for a leak to inevitably happen.
So I want to just play you a little bit more of what we heard from the president in that press gaggle last night. Take a listen.
The country's doing well. Iran is going fine. Going just absolutely fine. We totally control the Strait of Hormuz. We have control over it. Nobody else, only us. Our Navy is unbelievable. And things are going great for our country.
I mean, the only true statement there, Sam, is that the Navy is unbelievable. Everything else, Iran is not going great. The Strait of Hormuz is not going great. And nothing is as the president described. Being smuggled in a catering truck with your Diet Coke valet, is that supposed to express confidence to the American people from an administration that purports to be the most transparent administration in American history?
Well, this is kind of the underlying thread that ties all this together, which is dishonesty. I mean, I couldn't agree more with the Congressman or Carol. Like, obviously, it was a serious enough threat that President should have been moved, that a decoy flight was totally acceptable. The Secret Service made a determination. No one should begrudge the President for getting on the catering truck, as silly as that is, and going to this other military aircraft. You can even make the case that a bit of sort of deception was probably necessary in order to make sure that nothing leaked, as the Congressman said. But there is a widespread lack of honesty and transparency and outright lying that is accompanying this administration throughout this. And Carol's too kind to say it because she's a good person. But when she initially reported that they had to switch from the Qatari jet to the Air Force One, which then Trump, bolted anyway, because of security threats, the White House was very public in saying that she was a liar. They did. They went out there and they said she's a liar. And it turns out she was right and they were wrong. And that's just the MO for this administration that you saw with President Trump last night, where he's saying, we control the Strait of Hormuz. We do not. There's nothing going through the Strait of Hormuz. 8 ships when there used to be 130. Things in Iran are fine. They are not. We are, a couple of days before the 60-day target for the MOU when we're supposed to have a negotiated settlement. No one's acting like that's going to happen. Things are not going well, but they're asking you to believe that the sky is green, that 2 + 2 is 5, and that there was no security threat to Air Force One.
Congressman, in all of this, there's also just the reality that key figures did not know where the President of the United States was for a pretty extended period of time. I wonder, always you don't hear from Republicans out on the streets, but you hear from them behind closed doors. Any of your colleagues have any concerns about the fact that the President of the United States, folks didn't know where he was for a few hours?
Well, that's always a concern. The nail was hit on the head just a few minutes ago. But look, this episode is another reminder of really the broader costs of the war with Iran. The threat against the president was very serious, without question. And 18 American service members have already been killed in this war. Honestly, American taxpayers have had to spend billions on the war and take a real hit to their wallets. The conflict has required very real sacrifices. And, I think the president should present a very real plan, a serious plan before Congress in order for this war to ultimately end.
I wonder, Carol, as you are reporting on this, if you have the sense that that is the lens through which the administration is thinking about this. Are they thinking about it in terms of security and the presence? I mean, are they thinking about it in terms of the various directions the story has taken? What is their sort of chief concern inside the administration with both materially what transpired and the way that the narrative has been relayed publicly?
I know from sources, Alicia, that the White House is really beside itself about how this has leaked out, and eventually more and more of the truth has become clear, not because they have been honest with us, as Sam so meticulously describes, and generous to me as well, but not because they've been honest or transparent, but because people who want the truth to be known are willing to take the risk to share that information. And the only communication strategy that is happening at the White House is driven by how good it makes Donald Trump look. And he is the communicator in chief here. He is the person making those decisions literally on a minute-by-minute basis. And his conclusion is we just keep repeating over and over again through that megaphone that Iran is going fine, even though we all know that we've had an 8% inflation increase, largely driven in the last several months by what's been going on with this war. People are paying at the pump and everywhere else for the increase in cost as a result, and we don't have an end in sight, and the president doesn't have an end plan in his briefcase. The most important thing to Donald Trump, though, is the PR that he is dictating.
And Congressman, you have the Vice President of the United States saying we're in the middle of this thing. It does not feel like it is the middle, and you would think 5.5 months in we would be somewhere closer to the end. These new revelations, do you think they have any bearing, any impact on the ongoing negotiations over the war in Iran?
I'd like for this war to end. I think that the relationships that we've had with our P5+1 partners has been frayed. The relationship that we've had with the Arab League has been frayed. As Carol mentioned, we are in an affordability crisis, and it's a direct result of Donald Trump and this administration. Trump's tariffs have caused the price of groceries and everyday goods to skyrocket. In Indiana alone, the average family is paying $3,300 more a year for basic living expenses under this administration. And so we want to undo the damage that this administration has caused. We have an affordability agenda that deals with this. So hopefully in November, we can get to business.
Sam, I want to ask you one more question about the press, and I want to be clear that the press is not about the press itself. It is about the press as the eyes and ears of the American people. The president of the White House Correspondents Association, Jackie Heinrich, sent a memo to members of the press after the news broke, and it reads, "This afternoon I had a candid and productive meeting with senior administration officials to convey concerns directly." Heinrich said that she had advocated strongly for the importance of maintaining independent press coverage of the president and an accurate historical record of this moment. Do you think that is sufficient, what we're hearing?
I would like to know more about how the conversations went. That's probably the diplomatic, or I hope the diplomatic readout of what transpired, because it's very clear that there is a role for the press to document extraordinary circumstances and threats against the president and extraordinary steps that the president has to make because of those threats. Now, am I going to sit here and say there is a clear playbook that they should have followed for a moment like this? No, it's very difficult to probably thinking on your feet about how to make sure that the press has access to the president when he's being shuttled away in a catering cart, right? Like you don't really encounter that every day. And yet I would like to at least live in a world in which the White House and the president recognizes that they should try to at least get one reporter on that plane with the president, because there is a value, and in fact a need for someone with independent perspective to be there to document what's happening in case something does happen, right? Like that's the whole point. And so the other thing, of course, is that the fact that the White House press corps was left on Air Force One, which was the target of the threats, is disconcerting as well. But so was Marco Rubio, right? So, it's a very weird circumstance and very hard to understand how to move forward through it. But ultimately, you want the president, the White House, to be thinking about the importance of having a reporter with them at all times.
Right, and to your point, there's precedent for this in the aftermath of 9/11. There was a way for a scaled-down set of reporters to be with President Bush. Carol Leonnig, as always, thank you so much for joining us and bringing your reporting. Congressman Andre Carson, thank you. Sam's going to be back a little later in the hour when we all come back after U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro skulked away from the White House with what looked like a box of evidence about the vandalism at the reflecting pool. Could she now be trying to save her job, which she's pitching now over at the Justice Department? Plus, surprise, surprise, an election denier denying an election he lost. The Trump-backed pillow guy losing his own party's primary by 11 points. But still won't concede. We're going to try and wrap our heads around that and look at Trump's waning endorsement power. And later in the show, the cost of ripping up the White House costing more and more every day. New reporting on who's paying for it. We'll get to all of that and more when Deadline White House continues after this.
We're paying for it. Our children and our children's children are paying for it. It's just like the Afghanistan war that was spent, if I'm not mistaken, over $2 trillion in 10 years. God only knows how many lives and how many arms and legs and eyes and psychological damage and etc. Plus leaving all that equipment over there, which would I guess a couple $1 billion, the way I understand it, or at least millions and millions of dollars. Who paid for that? We did. Who paid for the mistake of the Bushes going after Saddam Hussein? That somebody had said that they had bombs of mass destruction. Who paid for that? We did. We not only paid for it on the front end, but we paid for it on the back end, pretending to be an attack regarding 9/11. We are the ones that are writing out the check, per se, regarding the politicians that's supposed to be working for we the people. And just like I said a while ago, not all of them are this way, but a great deal of federal people, as far as I'm concerned, they're not worth the weight that they're made out of to some degree, because they pick and choose. They choose to be the juror and basically the executioner whenever it comes to going after certain people. And I guarantee you, if local law enforcement was to be honest and speaking out and not thinking that they was going to be persecuted for being honest, they could tell you one horrible story after another pertaining to how that the politicians that was making the calls was making the wrong calls, but because they was making the wrong calls, they were supposed to keep their mouth shut because it was all being handled on an upper level. We see that again and again and again, beginning with Saddam Hussein, and there not being bombs of mass destruction. Who pays for it? We pay for it. Just like right now with all the tariffs, they wasn't lying. I do go along with one thing that I seen. I didn't get to record it. Donald Trump said that if he was any substantial president that's doing any kind of leverage work, is going to be more prone of having a bullseye on his back. I understand that, and I agree with that. Just like I agree with any true, authentic preacher that's really preaching the gospel the way that he's supposed to be preaching, even though certain deacons or certain members in the church rear up about it, he's going to have a bullseye on his back if he's preaching an authentic message out of the Bible pertaining to the King James. Now, if you want to preach a watered down version, kind of like Joel Osteen, and you want to be a silver tongue talker to where, oh, you don't want to offend your members now, don't make the congregation upset, because if you do, you're going to have a deacon board meeting and you're going to be the one primarily in it. This thing is all out of kilter. And if we do not have either the sense or the courageousness about us in standing up to these kind of things, then we're basically doomed. If we can't sit and discuss and debate and talk and look at different points of view and etc., then we're basically a doomed society to begin with. And I tend to wonder if we hadn't already went over that threshold, not only environmentally, but also politically and spiritually and emotionally and psychologically.
In Washington, a rare legal body that officials say could pave the way for federal prosecutor in the nation's capital to investigate some of its biggest and most controversial cases. Unlike a typical grand jury, a special grand jury can release a potentially critical report about the subject of an investigation, even if prosecutors do not find enough evidence to bring the person to trial. It is unclear what the new special grand jury will be tasked with probing, but those interviewed said.
And then they'll take pedophile baby rapers, a great deal of these judges, and basically pat them on the back of the hand, and they barely get chastised. But somebody like me that's preaching the gospel once more got a target on your back. They was wanting to bury me right here in my home state, my home county, in Weakley County, Tennessee. They'll let baby rapers get off on a light sentence while they crucify other people. Now you tell me what's fair about that. Plus, all the rigmarole going on with the Epstein files, that the truth be known, probably half of those people need to be in jail right now. That they keep trying to squander the public from knowing about. It's cruelty. It's cruelty, and it's basically extortioning the truth by them being up in these positions the way that they are and not allowing for us to know the whole truth or jeopardizing other people's lives on account of theirs.
Within executive privilege. They got a 21-page analysis that says the White House can treat the president's communications with people outside the White House as privileged, provided that 3 conditions are met, and I'll read them to you. They have to relate to official presidential decision-making, they have to involve or reflect communications with the president or the president's direct advisors, and they have to be confidential. And those are the only 3 prerequisites. What's even scarier about that, however, are 2 things. One is the definition of the term private advisor, which literally encompasses almost everyone who is not themselves an executive branch employee.
Okay.
But the second thing that's scary is, remember, the first condition that they say is it has to relate to official presidential decision making. Then they drop another footnote and remind us that the line between what is official and what is personal gets blurred very easily because the president's powers are not just what we consider to be the president's constitutional duties, their statutory duties, but for example, when the president uses the bully pulpit, that's not something that is found in either the Constitution or statute, but that is what they consider to be an official duty. All this to say that the president, according to the Department of Justice, can have conversations.
According to this Department of Justice.
According to this Department of Justice, can have conversations with virtually any private citizen and claim privilege over it. Now, I've seen analysis from a number of people in the media saying, well, this is the Trump administration preparing itself for the inevitable takeover of Congress, one or both houses, by Democrats and all the investigations that ensues. And I would submit to you, this is much closer to home. This is about an ongoing lawsuit between the American Bar Association and the administration about its war on law firms, and specifically executive orders targeting 4 law firms that between and among them have multiple enemies of the Trump administration that do work or have worked there, as well as a number of settlements cut with lots of law firms that didn't want to find themselves the target of an executive order. Those are deals that reportedly, according to the New York Times and many other publications, were negotiated by Boris Epstein. And the ABA issued subpoenas to Mr. Epstein, both for his testimony and for records. The Department of Justice then served a motion to quash, meaning they said as a matter of governmental policy, Mr. Epstein shouldn't answer those subpoenas, shouldn't have to, because his communications with the president are privileged. Ordinarily, in any other administration, you would say, how are they privileged? The guy doesn't work for the government. He doesn't even work formally for some apparatus operated by, like, the Trump administration outside the government. But according to this Department of Justice, not only in its briefs, but now according to this 21-page memo, Boris Epstein's communications with the president, to the extent they've existed, because they won't even acknowledge that they've had conversations about those things. If Boris is communicating either with the president or senior White House staff about this war on law firms, they say that's wholly off limits to the ABA and anybody else.
That type of protection, what alarms you most?
I think it's, taken with everything else that we're seeing, is they're essentially trying to grant themselves some level of immunity and protection.
Sure they are.
And who does that? People who are engaged in unethical or potential criminal activity. They're
That's right.
looking for that protection. And then, that taken with, Lisa and I have had this conversation. If you look at the Epstein files, the other,
There you go. There you go.
they claim privilege, or they claim, in that case, work product. They weren't releasing work product. Things like FD 302s I point back to. In any normal case file, say there were 1,000 serials, we call them in the FBI. In a case file, there would probably be dozens of FD 302s, which are commonly introduced into court. They're not work product. They're actually investigative summaries, inherently unclassified. They're claiming these are sensitive work products. In a a file that reportedly has up to 6 million documents. How many actually, FD 302s are there? Hundreds, thousands that you should be releasing to the American public. That's transparency, not trying to claim you have all this additional privilege, you need all these additional protections, and why? Because you're trying to objectively hide something,
Cover
or
up.
protect yourself from,
Cover up.
if Congress changes over, and there'll be investigations looking back into you. And then the broader question is, what other powers of the government are they planning to weaponize to protect themselves moving forward?
Help me understand Janine Pirro's decision about a special grand jury in the context of that broader goal.
Well, so let me put my wannabe ordinary prosecutor hat on.
Okay.
We can talk about this Department of Justice maybe separately because, as Nicole often says, there's Earth 1 and Earth 2. Okay? On Earth 1, the reason to convene a special grand jury is twofold. One, because you either have such complex evidence that you can't expect to present your entire case to someone over the context of 6 months. So you need 18 months and you need a special grand jury. Or you need a dedicated pool of people who's not going to hear anything but that case. The other reason to do it is because you want the report. And oftentimes a prosecutor may want that report because it bolsters their case. It shows that the grand jurors themselves heard a complex body of evidence and reached the same conclusions that prosecutors did. I'm thinking about Fani Willis, for example. When Fani Willis charged all those people in her federal election interference case, she had a special grand jury convened and they released a 35-page report that we, the public, ultimately saw. Now, we all know that that case was dismissed for unrelated reasons, but at the time, that special grand jury report was really important to our understanding how an ordinary body of 23 grand jurors reached the decision to indict as many people as they did. That's how an ordinary prosecutor would think. Now let me think about how this Department of Justice might be thinking about it. Ordinarily, a prosecutor is not supposed to charge someone unless they have a reasonable belief that when they take the case to trial, they can convince a jury of the person's peers beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has been committed.
Right.
You are supposed to reach that threshold in your own thinking before you charge. But here, the benefit of a special grand jury report is that you can dirty a person up. You can have a report that says this person has done something less than a crime, and yet you can besmirch their reputation, you can call them unethical, you can say they've done something wrongful that falls short of criminal activity.
Is that what you did when you were inside the FBI?
No, and what special grand juries would be called for are widespread political corruption, complex corporate or financial crimes. Enron, perfect example. Organized crime, political misconduct, Watergate. These are the things it would be used for.
Extortion.
They're not even giving ample justification of what the purpose of this is. It's very vague and leads you to believe that, well, for all the failed attempts that they've had to go against the 6 Democrats who spoke out about following the rule of law and all the other ones, that now you have a secret, opportunity to go after them, and something that a federal judge or another grand jury is not going to kick back on.
Priscilla Leary and Lisa Rubin, thank you both so much for being with us today. Up next, the My Pillow guy, the close ally of Donald Trump, telling the media there's no way he could have lost his primary.
All right, I'm going to weigh in on what they just got you talking about. First of all, a prosecutor, I don't believe, should be paid or working in the same imagery. Let me back up. A prosecutor and a public defender should not be getting paid and should not be working in the same imagery of the same company due to the fact that it is such of a conflict of interest. And what the prosecutor usually does, if they're basically just trying to stonewall because they can't really get a conviction out of that person, then they'll go after them with plea bargains and they'll put the pressure on them that way. And there ain't no telling how many people that's in jail right now that copped out on a plea bargain because they was afraid that if they did wind up standing before a jury, that they would wind up socking it to them sure enough, and the next thing you know, get either life without parole or the death penalty. The reason why I say public defenders should not be rubbing shoulders or elbows with the prosecutors is because I run into a case in Trigg County, Kentucky, where the woman that was representing me had a husband that was a juvenile judge. Because they was both in the same circuitry, they wouldn't allow for this particular woman of working in the same county, and they separated them from one county to another because she was a public defender. He was a juvenile judge. There was a conflict of interest there. So many times I've been let down by these prosecuting attorneys because the very public defender that I'm talking about, she come to me shortly after she picked up the case, and she said, "Mr. Jackson, you haven't done nothing wrong." She said, "You didn't threaten nobody." She said, "I listened to both of those conversations on both recordings, and you did not threaten either Mr. Hawkins or Lisa Hawkins, his wife, or Dwayne Camry, the captain at the time up in Land Between the Lakes." Then she come back later and explained it to me this: it wasn't so much what you done, but who you done it to. Okay, well, let's back up for a second. I got a cousin over in Obion County, works out of the Union City District, works for the TVI. His name is Jeff Jackson. A few years ago, when I first come back to Northwest Tennessee, I expressed to him my feelings about the authorities over here. He agreed with me. He said, yeah. He said, it's nothing but a clan or a mob. From the judges on down to the prosecutors, on down to the public defenders, on down to the sheriffs and the mayors and etc. He said he wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. This is why I think that they're frightened of them. I don't think they're frightened of them so much because they think that they could be assassinated, which that's always a possibility. But I think they're frightened of them because they know some of the dirt that they themselves had to do or did do that other people know about, and they feel like that if they squeal on that person, then that person's going to wind up squealing on the person that done the first squealing, pertaining to the whistleblower. Kind of like somebody borrowing something. If somebody borrows a screwdriver, let's say your neighbors, y'all get along real good, and he needs a pair of pliers or he needs this or that, and he borrows something, and then he forgets to bring it back. Well, hours turn into days. Next thing you know, days turn into weeks. And next thing you know, he remembers, oh man, I forgot to take that pair of pliers over to Joe. Rather than do the decent thing after him remembering, because he wasn't doing this intentionally. Rather than doing the decent thing by taking the pair of pliers back over to the person that he borrowed them from, he's going to excuse doing the right thing, and hopefully the other person has forgotten about it. Why? Because of shame. Shame starts taking effect pertaining to pride. Because they're so prideful, they hate to lower themselves to the degree, hey Joe, I forgot, man, I borrowed these freaking pliers from you and I was supposed to bring them right back, even though it's been 6 months, here they're back. You know, going back to the policy that honesty is the best policy. Well, if you're not honest in your own productivity, and you got people looking over your shoulder and they know the dishonesty going on in your life, right now I'm talking about my cousin, and I'm not saying that this be the case, I'm just saying that it could be, they're prone of not attacking other members in the same circle, because if they do, it could come back and bite them. Something is wrong with the system in it govern itself this way, because there's too many conflicting of interest issues going on. I don't know how to separate it I don't know how to divide it to where it would be just as fair for one as it is the other, especially when it comes to the way that the prosecutors does all this plea bargaining and puts this pressure on whoever or whatever. Because like I said, there's ain't no telling how many thousands of people right now, either in federal, state, or local jails, that basically took a plea bargain that never should have taken that plea bargain. But they was pressured into it. In addition to I finding out later, kind of like a cop that's working for a city, it don't matter if it's a small town or whatever, that whenever each month goes by, they got a quota that they have to meet. And if they don't meet that quota, they get their rear end chewed out. And at the end of the year, there's no opportunity for advancement or getting any type of bonus. The same way with the prosecutors. They get paid off of the convictions that they put on paper. And it doesn't matter if those people are truly guilty or not. As long as it's on paper, they get their bonuses. They get patted on the back. Now that's a fair system.
He has to, because the thing that Trump does,
Especially whenever it comes to barely spanking or reprimanding baby rapers, pedophiles, while attacking people such as myself. I'm going to use myself as an illustration pertaining to the hardship that's fallen upon me, basically trying to preach the gospel and tell people about the love of the Lord Jesus Christ.
His own power. And yeah, I think it's hard to read it as anything but that.
Well, it is, and to Sam's point, I mean, we need to acknowledge that he generally gets his way, but I also think we're finding some limits to that. Andy Ogles was, how do you pronounce his name? Andy Ogles was defeated in the primary, despite being a Trumpist. What happened in South Carolina? What is interesting, going back to your question about what Donald Trump will do,
The fact of the matter is, all along, I'm not going to say all the people, but a great deal of the people that know about me, going back 30 plus years ago, now soon, basically going on 40 years now, has that pride issue, that shame issue now that they're dealing with. Now naturally, there's a whole new group of people out there that never did know about me, never did know what I was preaching, never did know nothing about the opening of the seals, never did know nothing about 9 tapes going to the White House or none of the above. Whenever it comes to do as I say and not as I do, as far as a bunch of hypocrites, I don't think you can find any more of a hypocritical type group of people that works for law enforcement than you can here in America. At least if you're in Colombia or if you're in South America, in general speaking, or Mexico or Russia or wherever, those people are ruthless. You know that they're ruthless, and they're not going to be ashamed of their ruthlessness. They know that they're practicing communism. They know that they keep everybody on a short leash, and because of it, they pop the whip. And you know what? The majority of them don't care if everybody and their brother knows about it. So where over here in America, we got all these lame judges that want to give these pedophiles basically barely any type of punishment, while other people, based upon their human factor and their human feelings, will take it out on other people that don't deserve that type of punishment. It is so wrong in what we're seeing right now over in America. And the only way to straighten it out is that it's going to take good, honest voters to say, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to put up these safeguards, just like the internet, just like AI, just like all this stuff now that was basically dumped into our laps, including the laps of our children, that now we're finding out the consequences of. And I've been preaching now for years and years and years pertaining to the dangers involved, pertaining to all this internet stuff that now is at the disposal of anybody's hand, pertaining to their telephone if they hold their hand. Now they're just now awakening to the danger factors involved in handing this type of material or this type of tool or this type of weaponry over to children with undeveloped minds and getting peer pressure from their students on a day-to-day level. I've never seen so much blindness, just as Christ said that if the blind lead the blind, then all of them shall lead off into the ditch. Just like Christ said, using the gospel as an illustration, that if Saul had lost its Savior pertaining to the potency of the Saul, what good is it other than to be trampled down by the foot of man? Well, whenever you keep compromising, and you keep compromising, and you keep compromising, right now I'm talking about the pulpit, I'm talking about the ministry, you keep compromising in not calling it the way you're supposed to be calling it as far as interpreting the Bible correctly, eventually you'll have a free-for-all like we're having right here, in not having no law and order and everything being chaotic. Now, I'm preaching from the hip right now, and like I said, a great deal of these people here in this area wanted me to be a bootlegger street preacher. In other words, they did not want me to go through the proper elements to be an ordained minister. Even though at any given time I could have filed for a petition through the computer internet and probably get authorized to preach the gospel in less than 48 hours now. They was not going to stand with me, even though the ministry stands for love, grace, mercy, and peace, and the things that Jesus Christ of Nazareth taught. Why? Because it was too rich. It was too steep. It was too non-watered down. Going back to the example that Jesus Christ talked about, that your false teachers and your false prophets, the people will hold them up and fatten their pockets. But the real good ones, that's in the middle of the grassy row and getting in there where they ought to be as far as preaching the true gospel, well, they kick them down the road. Oh, you can't insult our congregation like that. You just well pack up and go on down the road, buddy. See? So the whole thing is turned into a free-for-all. It's turned into a cesspool. And you know ultimately who's going to get hurt because of it? We, the people. Us. And our children. And our children's children. Especially after it's been brought to your attention and you still don't have the decency of standing up against this type of hypocrisy? Wow.
From Max Miller, and now that you have heard these allegations, which have been supported by his wife's father, who is a sitting Republican senator, why have you not returned the contribution? So in a year in which Republicans face headwinds because Donald Trump has decided to double down on Max Miller and have this standard, it's a real problem for Republicans. And again, what an indication of the weakness of Speaker Johnson, who is not able to push back against this or handle this problem.
Right. Many of the House Republicans who've accepted contributions are, of course, in battleground districts, including Derek Van Order, who, according to Politico, was asked Tuesday about the $2,500 contribution he received from Miller during an interview about the results of his state's primary elections. He refused to discuss the matter, calling the accusations against Miller allegations he had heard about the day before yesterday. I don't know. I wonder sort of how you see this all playing out.
Well, it's interesting that you highlighted Derek Van Orden, who is a very vulnerable Republican here in my state of Wisconsin. You know, if one seat flips, it's likely to be his. A very strong opponent won the Democratic primary last night, somebody who has run against him before. And so the last thing that Derek Van Orden needs is yet another weight on his back going into this election. So in Wisconsin, you know, once again, because of the results, this is going to be a referendum on Trump. It's going to be a referendum on the Republican record. And Derek Van Orden is joined at the hip with Donald Trump, and apparently he's joined at the hip with Max Miller. It's not going to help.
There were a lot of eyes on Wisconsin last night. As you all know, your thoughts on where this general election is headed towards in your home state?
Well, you know, as I wrote in my newsletter, Democrats in Wisconsin sort of stared into the electoral abyss and decided that on second thought they would actually rather win elections than experiment with a candidate who was a bit out there. Democrats pressed the panic button. They decided that the front runner in this particular case, Francesca Hong, was just a bridge too far for many of the voters and would really put Wisconsin at risk of handing the governorship to a MAGA-aligned election denier, Tom Tiffany, who's a member of Congress. Now that race is reset, and Democrats are well positioned. They've been winning elections here. The electorate is clearly engaged. It is enthusiastic. And with Donald Trump's poll numbers in a state like Wisconsin, the Democrats ought to have the wind at the back. Now, what we don't know, of course, is that David Crowley, who is the Milwaukee County executive, is somewhat untested on the state stage. He will have to introduce himself.
Once again, they shot me out of the gate. They shot me out of the saddle before I ever got out of the gate good, pertaining to this message coming out of the Bible. There wasn't but one true, honest individual, David Jacobs, that on his deathbed said, Dennis or Juby, I wish that I would have supported you. I wish that I would have got in behind you and helped you with this message. Once more, there's so many more people that probably feel that way, but aren't willing to come clean that way towards confessing that because of pride. And what does the Bible say about pride? It cometh before a fall. And if you ain't got enough common sense to figure out that right now we're in a free-for-all, falling every day, either in our national debt or in fixing our potholes or keeping our community safe and et cetera, if you can't see that we're in a free-for-all, well then maybe you're part of the problem rather than the solution to it. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our military. And may God have mercy on us all pertaining to the chain of events that's at hand regarding our endeavors towards which way that we go from this moment on in protecting not only ourselves but our children and our children's children and our communities in large. Thanks for listening. Shalom.